Falcon Lake, Manitoba, located just about 150 kilometers east of the city of Winnipeg, was the site of probably one of the most dramatic and scary of supposed UFO encounters, not only in Canada, but anywhere else. On May 20th, 1967, industrial mechanic and Polish immigrant Stefan Michalak was out prospecting for mineral deposits. At one point, he seemed to have found what he was looking for, a big, rich vein of quartz. But as he was getting ready to try and go about staking his claim on it, a series of odd and bizarre events began happening. What would unfold would inevitably change his life forever, and would go on to become one of the most intriguing cases of a purported UFO attack ever. As he scoped out the area, Michalak was startled by a gaggle of geese suddenly flying to the sky with some commotion, which he followed skyward until his eyes fell upon an otherworldly sight hovering above. He says that the geese passed in front of two large oval or cigar-shaped objects in the air, surrounded by a reddish glow, and that one of them began to descend as he looked on to see it land on a nearby flat shelf of rock, where it seemed to morph into a disc-like shape right before his eyes. As the strange object did this, the other craft allegedly ascended into the sky to disappear, leaving Michalak alone with the disc that had landed only about 45 meters away from him. Michalak would go on to claim that he had warily approached the object, and as he did so, a hatch would open on the side of the object as the glow subsided to reveal a metallic surface. He claimed that the opening belched forth a smell not unlike sulfur, and that a motorized whirring noise could be heard emanating from within, as well as the glare from a very bright light. He still crept closer and says that he could hear what sounded vaguely like voices echoing about within. Michalak allegedly called out to whoever it was, but there was no reply. The multilingual Michalak even tried calling out in Polish, Russian, and German, thinking that this was a man-made craft, but only heard the unearthly machine hum each time. Whereas most people would have probably called it a day and gotten the hell out of there, Michalak was so curious that he moved ever closer to the craft, each call out to the occupants unanswered, until he was purportedly standing right at the portal that had opened in the craft, and it was here things would get even stranger. After taking a look inside to see various flashing lights, panels of some sort, all bathed in a purplish glow, he reached out to touch the side of the object, to find it extremely hot to the touch, causing him to withdraw his hand in surprise. Inspecting his glove, he apparently found that it had been actually melted, and as he stared at his hand in bafflement, the whole of the craft then began to rattle and shake. As this was happening, the now frightened man says he was struck in the chest by what felt like a stream of very hot air emitted from within the craft, which sent him sprawling back away from the disc. The strange craft then began to lift off the ground to hover over him, before shooting off over the trees into the sky to leave Michalak feeling nauseous to the point that he vomited where he stood. In his head, he could feel an intense pain rising, as well as an intense burning in his chest area, and he knew that something was very wrong. Wrapping himself close with his jacket, he meandered off towards the road and towards civilization, constantly vomiting all along the way, and eventually stumbling into the parking lot of the Falcon Motor Hotel. When the hotel stopped, he was delirious and rambling, disheveled and wild-eyed, and still vomiting, and it was his first thought that he was just very drunk. Michalak managed to make it on his own back on a bus to Winnipeg, where he was whisked off to the hospital, and things would get even weirder still. When examined, it was revealed that he had a series of burn marks that formed a grid-like pattern over his chest, as well as signs of what appeared to be radiation sickness, the causes unknown. Michalak's son, Stan Michalak, would later say of seeing his father in this state, "I recall seeing him in bed. He didn't look good at all. He looked pale, haggard. When I walked into the bedroom, there was a huge stink in the room, like a real horrible aroma of sulfur and burnt motor. It was all around, and it was coming out of his pores. It was bad. I was very afraid. My dad had been injured, and I didn't know anything about it." As soon as Michalak was lucid enough to give his version of events, the story hit the news and a sensation was born. Apparently, there was quite a lot of interest from the military and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and Royal Canadian Air Force at the time, with numerous alleged searches of the area of the incident using tracker dogs and aircraft, and even Michalak himself was recruited to join in the sweep when he was feeling better. They apparently found the remains of Michalak's scorched and melted glove, as well as some of his tools, and allegedly a circular area on the rock that was strangely devoid of moss or any vegetation, which possessed soil-high and radiation readings and some odd pieces of melted metal within the cracks of the rock. Also, they were radioactive. In the meantime, the story was really turning itself into a local legend, and there was by many accounts a pronounced military presence in the area for weeks, with helicopters hovering above at all hours. There was also a deluge of reporters and curiosity seekers gravitating towards the Michalak home, and in the meantime there was also an intense investigation going on into the claims he had made. There were some efforts at the time to discredit Michalak, trying to paint him as a town drunk who had hallucinated the whole thing or completely fabricated it. But this didn't stick and seems to have been wholly invented just to make him look crazy. He had been an MP in his former years and was known as an honest and responsible, upstanding citizen with no history of telling tall tales, and by all accounts not someone who would be making these kind of stories up or showing up stumbling, ranting about flying saucers. There was also the physical evidence left behind, which could not be easily explained and which was confirmed by doctors. UFO researcher Chris Rutkowski wrote the definitive book on the whole incident, When They Appeared, Falcon Lake 1967, the inside story of a close encounter. He said of this whole event, Michalak certainly wasn't an alcoholic. He didn't drink to excess, but he drank socially. To suggest that having a few drinks, or even 3 or 4 drinks the night before his experience, would make him imagine something to the point at which he would be physically burned and leave radioactive debris behind is, I think, quite a quantum leap. We have a witness who was judged by a psychiatrist not to fabricate stories. A person who was a good member of society, holding a good job, a background in the military himself, and no reason to perpetuate such a hoax at all. He maintained that until he died that this is what happened to him. He did not have a history of seeing aliens around every corner, like so many contactees and abductees maintain these days in their own stories. This was a very unusual experience that happened to him, and he was puzzled as anyone else. Whether it was something from outer space or a military vehicle, there's no question that something happened. It's a mystery. It's quite fascinating. I knew the family quite well, and he wasn't the type of guy to make up stories like this. Michalak's son would agree, having said, if Dad hoaxed this, remember we're talking about a blue-collar industrial mechanic. If he hoaxed it, then he was a freaking genius. There were also the findings of official investigators and civilian researchers who came to the conclusion that there was no explanation for the incident, the radiation, or what happened to Michalak. And to this day, the Canadian Department of National Defense considers the case to be officially unsolved. Michalak himself would adamantly stand by his story right up until his death in 1999. So, the obvious question is, what happened? Was it an elaborate hoax or something else, and if so, what? One idea is that he saw not aliens or extraterrestrials, but rather some sort of terrestrial experimental aircraft. And indeed, Michalak himself thought this could be the case, never really specifying, insisting that what he saw was aliens. His son Stan said, if you asked him what it was he saw, he could describe it in intimate detail, but he would never say, oh, it was definitely extraterrestrials, because there was no evidence to prove that. He might ask, what do you think I saw? But right up until he died, his story never changed one iota. Nothing about it or how he told it. I'm not so close-minded that I can't entertain the possibility that it's otherworldly. I can't discount that. But without specific evidence to show me that it is, I don't know. What I can tell you is that I'm an aviation fanatic, a huge aviation buff, and I'm very familiar with how aviation technology has advanced in the past 50 years. And there was nothing even close to that in the works anywhere at that time. So what could have happened? Was this an alien presence? Was it some type of top-secret military craft? Was it just a story that Michalak made up? And if so, how did he make the injuries and the physical evidence that was allegedly found at the site? Or was it something else altogether? What caused the grid-like burns on his chest? And was this some sort of attack directed at him? These are the questions that still burn in our minds that we don't have the answers to. And the case of the Falcon Lake Incident has become one of the greater mysteries of the landscape of UFO lore. What do you think happened, though? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to give the video a like and subscribe if you want to. And don't forget to join us on Friday for another The Unknown Files, here on Unknown Territory.